Hey everyone, it's Anthony from Pretty Printed here. In today's video, I'll be building a to-do list app in Flask. So a couple of weeks ago, I created a video where I made a blog app, and I basically did it to where I made it in one take. I didn't edit the video in such a way that it made it seem like I knew what I was doing. So I'm going to do the same thing in this video. So I may mess up, and it's probably not going to look that good because I won't be using a template, but you'll see my process for building an app in Flask. So before I get started, I just want to remind you to check out prettyprinted.com. I have courses up on the site. I have free courses and premium courses, so just check that out at prettyprinted.com. There's also going to be a link in the description below to go to the site. So to get started, I am going to do the typical Flask imports, and I'll probably need render template and request, and let's use those three for now. I'll keep this app pretty simple because I don't know how well things are going to go. And then it can be up to you to do any refactoring that you want. But in this case, I'll keep it simple. So I'm creating a route, just a single route. This is going to be a single page app. It's not going to have any fancy functionality. It's going to be server side only. So let me return the index there. All right, so I'll create a new file. I'll create the index. So templates, and then inside the templates directory, I will create the index.html. All right, so let me get started with the HTML, to-do app, and then I'll put to-do list here. Okay, so now let's take a look to make sure all that worked. I actually have to start the app first though. So Python app. And I shouldn't have any errors because there's barely any code. Okay, so to-do list. And basically what I want to have is I want to have a list of checkboxes and their associated to-do items. So to do that, let's use a list. Let's see how that looks. So it's going to be a unordered list. And then for each list item, I'll have a checkbox input. So let's see if this works. So checkbox, or this is type checkbox. Type equals checkbox. And then some text. And if I copy that a couple of times, we'll see how it looks. Like I said, this won't be the best looking app because I'm not using a template. Okay, so that's ugly, but it works. So I have the bullet item here, and then I have a checkbox here, and then I have some text that follows it. So if you want to modify this to make it look better, just take the code that I'm going to add in the description below after the video, and you can make it look a lot better. But the functionality should all be there. So some text, and let me see if I can make this a little bigger. So I will say, what if I make these headers? I don't know if that's going to look good. So let's try one H3 header. And that's going to be looped over. So I'll just have it repeated. So H3 doesn't look that good. Let's try style. And then I believe it's size or font size. Let's try 20 points. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks a little bit better. So you know what? I'll use that. So I'll just keep the style inline. Let's try 30. Let's see how 30 looks. Like I said, this is going to be looped over, so it should look a lot better. Okay, so that looks better. I mean, it's ugly, but it looks better. And maybe if I took out the list items and just use, let's do a span. See how span looks. So I'll change all these to spans, and then I'll get rid of the unordered lists. Okay, so I'll bring the list back. I know there's a way to make the bullet points go away, but I don't want to focus on how this looks for too long. So there we go. And then I'll also need an input to add a new to-do item. So I'll have a text input here. And let's see what it looks like. Okay, so before that, I'll say something like add a new to-do item. And then I'll close out the div. I'll make this a div as well. And accidentally deleted everything. All right, so let's take a look at this now. Okay, so add a new to-do item, and then it has a input box here. So now I need a button to submit this. So input type submit. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much all I need. So basically how this is going to work is I'll add some to-do item here, I'll submit it, and then it will appear in this list. And then I can check it off like that, and it will keep the checkbox every time I load the page. And of course, the to-do items will be stored in the database. And speaking of the database, let me go ahead and create it. So from flask_SQLAlchemy, I'm going to import SQLAlchemy, and I'll create the configuration. So app config SQLAlchemy database URI. This is going to be the location of the database. So in my particular case, it's going to be here. So users Anthony documents to do, and I'll call this todo.db. And then what I want to do is I want to create a single class for SQLAlchemy. And before I do that, I have to instantiate SQLAlchemy. So SQLAlchemy, and then pass in the app. And then I can use db.model. And what I want to do is I want to create an ID. So ID is going to be db.column. It's going to be an integer. And the primary key is going to be set to true. And then I'll have the text of the to-do. So in the particular case that I have here, it's some text, but obviously it would be different once I have the app up and running. So it's going to be a string, and let's limit it to, let's say, 200 characters. And then finally a complete. So db column, and then this is going to be a Boolean field. So it's going to be either true or false. So when you first enter a to-do item into the database, it will be false for complete because it's not done. And then once you actually complete it, it will be set to true. Okay, so that should be enough for my database. So I need to create the actual database file. So to-do, look at the tables to save it. And then I'll start up Python and import DB from my app so I can instantiate or create the database. All right, so if I look at the database again and look at tables, then I see to-do there. So everything is working so far. So now that I have the table, the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to add new items into the database for the to-dos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this stuff here into a form, and it's only 2 inputs. So what I'll do is I'll add a form here, and what I'll do is I will format this a little better. So it's going to be a form, and then input, and then in the form there. So I need to give the inputs, or just the text input, a name. So the name is going to be to-do item. And the form needs some extra information. So the action is going to be where the form gets submitted. And in this case, I'll create a route called add. And the method is going to be post. So let me go ahead and create that route, app route, and then add. And it's only going to accept post requests, methods, posts. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to verify that I'm getting the data that I want. So in this particular case, it's only the to-do item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a header, so it's easier to see, of whatever the item is. So I'll close that out, and I'll format that with requests form, and then to-do item. So that's the to-do item that is passed into this route. So I'll save that and I will start up my app and let's see what happens. All right. So I'll restart it. And the formatting changed a little bit because I changed how the HTML is formatted, but it's not really a big deal. Like I said, this is going to be really ugly since I'm not doing any preparation for this. But test will be the first item. And if it returns, then I know it's submitting correctly. So I call it the add route and I see test. So I know that I'm receiving the data correctly whenever I add an item. So now what I want to do is I want to actually save that item into the database. So to do that, I need to instantiate a to-do using the class that I created for the model. So I'll just call this to-do and it's going to be capital to-do. And the text is going to be the data from the form. So request form to-do item. And there won't be any security checks on this because it's pretty straightforward. And then complete is going to be initialized to false. So what I'll do after I create the to-do item, I will add it to the database. So db session add to-do. And then after that, what I'll do is I will commit it. So db session commit. So now that I have that done, I need to verify that everything gets saved to the database when I add a to-do item. So what I'll do is I'll change this return here and I will redirect to the index because there's really nothing that happens after I add the to-do. So return, redirect, and then URL for index. So I need to import those two, redirect and URL for. And let's take a look now. All right, so first thing that I'm going to add is, let's say, complete to-do app video. And I will submit query, and it reloads the same page. And of course, nothing happens here because I haven't done anything with that yet. But now let's take a look at the database. So SQLite 3 and then todo.db. I'm going to select from the to-do table, and I see that I have one row in there. So the ID is 1 because that's auto-generated by SQLite. And then the second value is the to-do item I just added, so complete to-do app video. And the third is the complete status of the to-do. And in SQLite, false is represented by 0 and true is represented by 1. So I know that my to-do is saving to the database correctly. So I can go ahead and exit, and I'll start my app up again in a second. But now what I want to do is I want to pass all the to-do items in the database, in this case only 1 so far, and I want to pass them to the front end so they appear in this list. So instead of seeing some text, I'm going to see the actual to-do item. So to do that, what I will do is I will query in the index. So I will write this query. So to-dos is going to be the list of to-dos that is in the database. And since I only have one table, it's pretty easy to query. So to-do.query all. And then what I want to do is I want to pass this to the front end. So I will pass to-dos just like that. Then I'll go to my index, and instead of having these unordered lists be hard-coded here, I'm going to loop over to-dos. So let's see, for to-do in to-dos, because to-dos is the name of the list that I'm passing in, and then I end 4 down here. I can go ahead and get rid of the final 2, so I'll leave the first one, and I'll change some text to be the actual to-do text. So in this case, to-do dot text. So if I save that and look at it, I have to start the app, of course. That helps. So if I run it again, I see complete to-do app video as my only to-do. Now, if I add another one in there, let's say upload video to YouTube, and I submit, what I'm expecting to happen is the page will refresh, but when it refreshes, it automatically includes that second item from the database because I set up the code to both add to the database and to show me everything that's in the database. So I'll go ahead and submit the query here, and I see it. So I see complete to-do app video and then upload video to YouTube. So now what I want to show is I want to show these checkboxes, but first I need a way to update the checkboxes. And what I'll do is I'll create a simple button. Since this is going to be server-side only, it's not going to have any fancy JavaScript that allows me to kind of update in place, even though that would be a good idea in your refactor if you choose to modify the code. I'm going to make this really simple, and I'm going to use another button to kind of trigger what needs to be updated. So this is going to be a second form. And maybe this won't be the best approach, but as I go through it, I'll know for sure. So I'll close out the form here. So the form is going to wrap around the list, and I'll move the form outside of the list. Okay, so the form is outside of the list now, and I'll indent this so it looks a little better. And then the action will be update, so /update. And instead of using update, I could use URL for. I'll use that just by convention. So update. And then for this one, I'll change this to URL for add. So URL for add. Doesn't really matter either way. They do the exact same thing, of course, but I'll just change the action to be URL for. And then the method will be post again. So I need to go ahead and create that route so it can actually generate the URL. So update methods will be post. And then I'll create the view function. And in this case, I'll return the same thing as what I returned in the add route, just the URL for the index, because there's no other page that you can go to. So I'm going to update the database in between those, but for now, I just needed the route so I can generate everything. So after the list, I'll have an input type submit, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so I'll change this so the value will be update items, so it has a better name instead of submit query. So update items. And then for the first one, I'll change it to add item. Okay, so there we go. So now let me make sure the add item still works, because I changed that URL for to add instead of just add directly. So another thing to do. So add item. And I see it there. So I know that it's still working correctly even though I modified the code. So anytime you make changes like that where the code should behave in the same way but you're just changing how you write the code, you want to make sure you test it, because oftentimes you'll make a change like that and then you'll write some other code and then you'll find that you messed up something in the original change when you thought it was very simple. I've made a ton of mistakes like that in my programming career. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to kind of verify what gets passed when these checkboxes are submitted. So what I'll do is I will give them a name. So each one has to have a unique name so I can kind of access the data. So in this particular case, I want the name to be todo.id because the ID is unique in the database. So I'm able to add the ID as the name because that is the only unique value that I have. So now when I submit this, I just want to see what it looks like. So I'm going to print request.form. And let's see what gets returned when I submit this form. So submit, and I have the print statement here. So it tells me there's an immutable multi-dictionary, but there's nothing in it. So let me make sure everything looks good in the HTML. And let me view source. So I have the input type checkbox. I have the submit, and I have the form there. So let me try viewing it directly to see if that does anything. So form 1 and update. So bad requests, and it's telling me bad requests because it can't find that ID in the form. So let me look and see if there's a better way of doing this, because I need to submit all the checkbox inputs. So first, let me try submitting a checkbox this way. So input type checkbox, and then the name is going to be test. All right, so if I can see tests, then I know it's something with the loop. So I'll go back to the index, update items, and I get bad request again. So it seems like the form itself is not working correctly. So I have the two forms. I have a name for the form, and that's not working. So now the next thing that I can do is I can look at the developer tools to see what's getting sent. So I'll go to my network tab, and I will send this request, and it gives me a 400 error. And if I take a look over here on the right-hand side, it's telling me that there are no parameters being passed along with the form. So that's how I know that it's not picking up on my checkboxes. So what I'll do is HTML checkbox, and I'll see if there's anything missing. So this is something that I don't normally work with, so it's not something that I can think of how to use immediately. So the data is submitted with the checkbox's name, and let's see, there's a value. Okay, so maybe there needs to be a value. Value equals test value. And let me go ahead and submit this. And I'll use the developer tools again to see what it looks like. So if I update items, look at the parameters, and again, nothing is passed in the request. So if I look at the request headers, it's just telling me that nothing is being passed along in the form. So, wrong one. Let me go back here and let me see if there's anything else that could help me out. So an ID, maybe multiple checkboxes. So let's see. Value is music. Let's try adding an ID. Let's see if that changes anything. So test ID, and then I will submit the form again, and then I'll look at the requests. So params, and once again, it is not giving me any useful information. So a different approach that I can take is using links. So instead of a checkbox, let me try to find something here that kind of helps if there's anything else. I don't know if it's the form. So let's see the form. I'll try removing the unordered list to see if that's something. So I'll change these to spans, and it's going to be ugly, but this is just going to be a test. And if this doesn't work, then I can use links. Okay, so yeah, it's not working correctly, and I don't use checkboxes enough to be able to tell when it's not working correctly. So I'll go ahead and skip that, and what I'll do instead is I'll I'll have links for everything to update. So I'll backtrack out of this and make sure it looks the same. Okay. And what I will do is I will separate them into two lists. I will have a complete list and an incomplete list. So the first list is going to be incomplete. So I'll just put, let's do incomplete items. And let's see. All right. And then I will have a second list for complete items. So I will no longer use the checkbox because I couldn't get that to work. Normally, when I plan these things out ahead of time, I can do the research necessary to figure out how it works. But since I'm doing this all in one take, I don't want to spend too much time working on that because it could take me 30 minutes, and I don't want you to watch me mess around with checkboxes. It doesn't seem like the most interesting thing. So what I'll do is, instead of having the checkboxes, I'll just have a link that says mark as complete. So let's try adding a link after. So it's not going to go anywhere for the moment. Mark as complete. And I'll close out the anchor tag there. Okay, so like I said, this is really ugly. But what I want to do now is when I mark as complete, when I click that link, it's going to take whatever to-do item was there and move it to the complete items list, which will be below it. So since I don't have any complete items, I'll skip that for just the moment. And what I'll do is I'll work on this part first. So I can remove the form and the input because I'm no longer using that. And let me move the indentation in for everything and make sure it still looks the same. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to allow for marking each one as complete. So what I'll do for this is I will create a route. So instead of update, I'll change this to complete. And since I'm using a link, I can no longer use posts because it's not being submitted in a form. It's going to be a typical GET request, but it's still going to redirect to the index once it's done. So what I want to do now is I want to create a variable in here for ID. So let's just call this ID. And I'll pass in the ID there. And what I want to do is I want to print, or how about return the ID? So return and h1 / h1 format, and then the ID that gets passed in. So I'll comment this out for now. And then I will use URL for here. So URL for complete, and I'm going to pass in the ID. So the ID is going to be todo.id. So I'll save that and run it again. And if I look at the bottom, you probably can't see, but I see the IDs along with the URL. So I'll click this one. This is ID number 2. So I see 2 there. And then if I go to 3, I see 3. And if I go to 1, I see 1. Okay, so everything there is working correctly. So now what I want to do is I'll take this part out and I will return the redirect again. But in between that, what I need to do is I need to update the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to query for that particular to-do item. So to-do is going to be equal to to-do query filter by ID equals ID. And this should be switched to an integer. I could use get, but I already wrote filter by, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to filter by the ID, which is going to be the number that's passed in, and it's going to give me a to-do item. So I want first because I'm only expecting one item from the database back. And I'm not going to do any validation to ensure that's actually in the database. I'm going to assume that it is. So once I have the first item, then I can update the to-do complete equals to true. So complete, of course, is this Boolean column here. And then what I'll do is I will commit the session. So db.session commit. So what this is doing is it's going to query for the to-do, and then it's going to update the flag to true, which in the database translates to the number 1. And then because I update it, I need to commit that transaction. So I'm going to run db session commit. So let's give it a shot. First thing, I will mark this one as complete. It returns me to the index, but of course everything stays the same because I didn't modify things to be different. So the first thing I'll modify is this query for the index. So instead of having just all, I'm going to filter by where complete is false. So I want the incomplete items. So if I run this again, now another thing to do disappears. And now that it disappears, I want to show it again. So what I'll do is I'll create a variable called incomplete. And instead of to-dos, it would just be incomplete. So I'll change this to incomplete there and there. And then on the template, I'll change the variable to incomplete. So when I run this, everything should look exactly the same. Now I also want to query for the complete ones. So it's going to be the same query with one minor difference. Complete is true. And then give me all of those. And then I'll pass in complete to the template. And then I will pretty much create the same loop. So completed items. And then I'll have another unordered list. And then what I'll do is I'll add the todo.text. It won't have the link because it's already done. And I need to loop over this. So for to-do in complete. Close out the loop if I can hit the right key on my keyboard. And then in for. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to see if that works. Okay, so I see completed items and it has another thing to do. So I want to use the same style as before, so I'll just copy this and paste it over the existing list item. And now I see another thing to do is in my completed items list. So this should be pretty much everything that I need to do. I mean, this app is very straightforward, but you can see a lot of things that have to go into it. So yet another thing, I'll add the item. It gets added. Here's another one to do this. And one more. Okay, so now if I just click any of these links, what it will do is move it down to the completed items. So if I click yet another thing and mark it as complete, it adds yet another thing to this list below. If I click the link for to do this, then it moves to do this down there. And of course, if I click the link for any of the other ones, it will do the exact same thing. So my to-do list is pretty much complete. I still have to do these 4 things, but everything is very straightforward. So that's really all I want to cover. And you can see that even though this app was pretty simple, I ran into that issue with the checkboxes. And that's something that will happen when you're writing your apps. But of course, you'll have more time to research, unlike me. So you can probably actually figure out how to do something like that. And this app isn't perfect. There can be things that can be refactored, and of course you can make it look a lot better than this, and you can make it function a lot better. But you can see that in about 34 minutes I was able to create this straightforward app that does something useful. I mean, if you wanted a to-do list and you didn't have one for whatever reason, you could run this app on your computer and have a to-do list. So that's all I want to cover. Like I said, if you're interested in my courses, they're more in-depth than my YouTube videos, then just go to prettyprinted.com. Each course is well over an hour, and the premium ones are several hours long. So there's way more content than you would get on YouTube. As for this video, if you want the code to modify and make it look better, I have a link in the description below for it. If you have any questions about what I did in this video, you can leave a comment below and I will get to it. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time.